From the TV20 News and First Alert weather teams, this is the TV20 First Alert Hurricane Special, sponsored by Comfort Temp Heating and Air.
Hi, I'm TV20 Chief Meteorologist Mike Potter. I've helped to guide you and your family through 32 hurricane seasons in North Central Florida. And my same promise to you this year to be a steady voice during what can be an uncertain few months. Regardless of where you're from and where you live right now, the entire TV20 weather team is devoted to making sure you stay safe. During the next half hour, we're committed to bring you important and life-saving information.
I'm Bradley Benoit with expert predictions for this year's hurricane season.
I'm Danielle Van Pelt reporting on the changes hurricanes cause to our ecosystems.
I'm Stuart Baker, and I'll explain a hurricane's deadliest impact.
Before we take a look ahead, we want to take a look back at 3 hurricanes that made landfall in Florida last year: Debbie, Helene, and Milton.
You know, what I found interesting about this hurricane season is just what it meant to be on the coast when they made landfall. I mean, this was my first year working as a professional meteorologist, and to be on the coast gave me a whole new perspective of what the intensity and the damage that these storms can cause. I was there for Debbie, and I saw, gusts up to 70, 60 miles an hour, and I thought that was very, very fast. It was like sticking your head out the side of a moving car. And it was a whole different story when I was there at Horseshoe Beach for Helene, and a Category 4 storm was making landfall, and I was seeing 100+ mile-an-hour gusts and storm surge that was already starting to wash over the roads.
When we were looking at the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season, I found it very interesting that a lot of organizations were predicting such a high season. And it's very common to see a high hurricane season, but those numbers were just insane. And sure enough, it did deliver. I mean, talking about June, a Category 5 right out of the barrel didn't affect our area, but it's very rare to see a Cat 5 that early the first month of hurricane season. We know it goes all the way to November 30th. So I appreciate how it's 6 months, because by the time it gets to Florida, following the Gulf Stream coming through the Caribbean and all of that, we begin to see our storms coming in August. Debbie, back to back with Helene. Now, Helene made landfall around the Steinhatchee area. Of course, it did devastate North Carolina. That did make the big headlines just because they have different terrain than us and their mudslides. Even if we don't get a direct hit in our area, we can still see devastating flooding conditions, strong winds. Our power is still getting knocked out. I mean, as someone from Fort Myers, I got to experience Ian and of course Irma. And Irma went up the entire spine of Florida, affected all cities. Of course, not as hard as Idalia or Helene for our area in North Central Florida, but still, any hurricane that's making any state landfall is something to be paying attention to.
Obviously, 2024 was extremely active, not only as a hurricane season as a whole, but for us here in North Central Florida. And you all brought up all the storms, and those are all very impactful for us here in North Central Florida. I think the one that stands out the most is the obvious one, Helene, just because how big the storm was. And not just intensity-wise. I mean, this thing was massive in size, and so that just goes to show it doesn't matter where a center of a storm necessarily makes landfall, its impact can be felt far and beyond just from the center of circulation, and we saw that across all of North Central Florida. At first, yeah, it looked like it was going to be a panhandle direct hit, but as the days got closer to landfall, we saw that shift eastward, and we quickly were realizing this was going to have an impact across North Central Florida. And I think for us, the big thing was storm surge. Calling for a 12 to 18 foot storm surge. We do not take that lightly. That was something that we were on air preaching to our viewers, especially those along the coast. Hey, flee the water. It's a very serious situation. And thankfully, most people did. I had a few people that stayed out on the islands and kind of recorded and did their thing. But I think we really drove home that point to make sure that we were keeping everyone safe from this storm, and in particular, fleeing the water.
From 2024 to 2025, what are experts predicting this year? Here's meteorologist Bradley Benoit.
All right, so there are 2 main reasons why CLOSPI and Colorado State University are calling for an above-average season. First off, warm sea surface temperatures out in the Atlantic, although I will say water temperatures are a little bit cooler compared to this time last year, so that is some good news. And then the second reason is that they are citing a likely absence of El Nino during the hurricane season. Now, For us here in North America, we like an El Nino setup during the hurricane season because it tends to lead to fewer storms across the Atlantic basin, and here's why. With an El Nino in place, we would have warm sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific that leads to rising air, showers and storms, and thus in turn more hurricanes in the eastern Pacific. And then we would also get these strong trade winds that get transported across Central America, in the Caribbean, and the rest of the Atlantic, and so that would in turn lead to fewer storms across the Atlantic basin. So that's why we like El Nino, but like I said, CLOSPA and Colorado State University expect El Nino to be absent, and then on top of that we have the warm sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, so thus they're calling for an above average season. But like I say, each and every year, no matter the forecast, no matter the predictions, it only takes one storm to impact the area to make it a quote-unquote active year. And so that's why we have to prepare for each season equally. Here's the list of names, and if you're unfamiliar with how this process works, the list gets reused every 6 years. So this list was last used in 2019. Most of the names still on the board, but of note, the D-name storm back in 2019 was Dorian, but that was such an impactful hurricane that that name got retired, replaced with Dexter. First name on the list is Andrea. So, of course, the first time we see a tropical system forming into a tropical storm, that's the name it will get.
Preparing for a storm may seem overwhelming, but we want to walk you through steps to make it less stressful. First, develop an evacuation plan that includes gathering supplies like food, water, and batteries. Make copies of important paperwork like your insurance policies and document your possessions. And plan for several routes in case there are road closures. You can find more information about evacuation routes for each of our counties as well as the latest forecast. There's even a QR code that allows you to access all of this information instantly, including a link to report storm damage. You can also click on the Hurricane Headquarters tab on our website, wcjb.com. Coming up, we talk a lot about the storm surge. We're helping you better understand the science behind it and how you can prepare now.
You're watching the TV20 First Alert Hurricane Special, sponsored by Comfort Temp Heating and Air.
Hurricane Helene brought a massive storm surge onto our coastal towns. Meteorologist Stuart Baker and Danielle Van Pelt break down what the storm surge is and the unfortunate effects it leaves behind.
We all know that hurricanes are rated off of a wind scale, and it's called the Saffir-Simpson scale, and it goes from 1 to 5, meaning that usually the higher the wind speeds, the more damage it is going to cause to your property, especially when it gets to the extreme category 4 and 5. However, the wind speeds aren't the only thing that cause damage. In fact, it's usually the size of the hurricane and where you relate to the hurricane that causes the most damage. Take this for example. This is the front right quadrant. So as it's approaching the shore, if you're in this section, you can experience the most storm surge and flooding. In fact, the bigger the storm is, the more storm surge you're going to have in your area. And that's exactly what we saw with Hurricane Debbie and Helene.
Right now I'm standing here over at Cedar Key, Florida. Right about now, 2 feet of storm surge. Well, not really. This is the ocean, of course, but you can imagine Hurricane Debbie saw about 2 to 3 feet of storm surge moving into residents' home across this coastal area, causing significant amounts of floor damage and, of course, quite a scare. It also caused significant road delays for those trying to return to their homes. However, last season, Cedar Key saw an even bigger jump in storm surge when Hurricane Helene struck.
I'm standing in roughly about 5 feet of water. Now you can only imagine what 5 feet of storm surge would do to your home, especially with your home level floor almost completely gutted and most countertops overflowing with water. Now this is only half of what Hurricane Helene brought to Cedar Key with 12 feet of storm surge. The 12 feet of storm surge Cedar Key experienced flooded multi-story homes and extended miles inland. Other locations saw up to 20 feet of storm surge, showing why it's important to take the warning seriously.
And I found myself in this situation. You almost don't believe what a storm surge is going to be and what it's going to do until you see it happen. And what I've seen in town here is that now the town, because we've been hit by multiple storms, they know what it'll do, and you have to really prepare for a storm surge.
And people think, oh, well, 12 feet of water is not that big a deal. I've been in a 12-foot swimming pool before, but it's the force of the moving water. It's the force of the entire Gulf of Mexico just raging like a torrent. In all my life, I've never seen a force that strong.
Rising water levels isn't the only threat related to storm surge. Strong currents under the water created by the surge pose a risk that can't be seen as easily.
I was shielded from the force of the storm surge by the building, so I thought, this is no big deal. I took one step out past the museum into the main road, and it swept me off my feet in a second. I had no chance to keep my balance, and if I hadn't caught a hold of the stop sign there, they'd have found me in Otter Creek.
When forecasts show potential surge impacts for your area, it's important to prepare ahead of time. Whether it involves placing sandbags and boarding up windows or completely evacuating, make sure you have a plan in place.
My advice is to prepare more than you think you need to, because it's a whole lot easier to move things back in place dry than to try to clean it all up wet.
Ultimately, storm surge is the leading cause of fatalities during a hurricane, so make sure you're staying up to date on what the experts are predicting before the storm hits.
A business owner in the town of Suwanee is back on her feet and taking into account the lessons learned from last year. TV20's Kayla Lewis shows us what Bill's Fish Camp looks like now after being overrun by floodwaters.
It was devastating. It was mud and water, and it was destruction.
Stella Clark is the co-owner of Bill's Fish Camp in Suwanee. She's looking back on the destruction Hurricane Helene caused to her business. All 18 of their rooms flooded, including the ones which sit at the highest point on their land, where water never reached before. The water and mud damaged their windows, doors, walls, and appliances. Last October, they took the insulation out of the walls. But now, their rooms are completely redone.
Everything is new and clean and fresh.
This includes new floors, walls, appliances, and no more bottom cabinets.
It was just so sad. But as you can see, we have recovered with a lot of hard work. A lot of people have put a lot of effort into it.
And Clark says business is booming, not only now, but even during their rebuilding process as people came to support them.
They accepted the fact that maybe the room didn't have air conditioning.
She says the whole community came together to help each other get back on their feet.
That's the joy of being at Bill's Fish Camp, is the people you meet here and the camaraderie.
But they are now looking ahead to this year's hurricane season and thinking about the lessons they learned last year.
Instead of closing the doors and holding in the water and the mud, we'll open the doors and let the mud and the water go out. And maybe the water going out will take some of the mud with it.
They plan to take extra precautions to prepare for Mother Nature and any unwanted guests she may bring.
We're going to be sure to move out the mattresses, the appliances, move out anything that can be moved, take it to higher ground.
So now they'll stay vigilant and prepared as they pray to not go through the same devastation they went through last year. In Suwanee, Kayla Lewis, TV20 News.
Coming up, your entire family plays an important role in preparing beforehand, but there are things everyone can do during and after a storm to make the cleanup easier, including practicing good generator and power line safety.
You're watching the TV20 First Alert Hurricane Special, sponsored by Comfort Temp Heating and Air.
It's better to be proactive instead of reactive when a storm rolls through. Bradley Benoit tells us how to get moving ahead of any threats.
Waiting until the last minute may make you forget some important things, like protecting your home, cover windows and secure doors, determine shelter options, and remember your pets. Make sure you have your medications, charge your phone, and fill up on gas.
You also need to stay protected during storms.
Stay in a safe place away from water and winds. Have a way to get weather alerts and forecast updates. Avoid travel unless ordered to evacuate.
And certainly use caution after storms. If you evacuated, wait until you're directed to safely return. And clean up safely. Don't overdo it, and check on your neighbors. prepare for the likelihood help and communications may not be readily available.
We have to go out and assess. So in those situations, you could get 20, 30,000 people knocked out at one time. That's when we go to the big circuits and say, what can we do to get the most people back as quickly as possible? So you could immediately have 20, 30,000 people that are out of power.
Hazards remain after a storm, so consider this. Be careful near damaged buildings. If you smell gas, call 911 immediately. Don't walk or drive through floodwaters. It only takes a foot of fast-moving water to sweep away a car. Damaged power lines can still be active even if they have fallen to the ground.
Practicing good generator safety can save your life. Be mindful. Portable generators produce carbon monoxide, which can kill within minutes. Only use generators outside, away from windows, doors, and other openings. Your home should have working, battery-powered carbon monoxide detectors.
Hurricanes can even cause major devastation to your yard, especially in terms of tree damage.
When hurricanes come barreling through, your homes and property aren't the only things that become damaged. It is estimated that nearly 72 million acres of trees are killed or damaged from tropical storms and hurricanes each year. However, different species of trees withstand the wind differently.
Here in North Central Florida, we obviously know we have a lot of different species of trees. Right next to me is the Florida pine, one of the most common in our area. Now, these roots do run really deep into the ground, anchoring them down. This does make them pretty resilient and toppling over, but still, their wood is rather soft, making them easily vulnerable to snap. Unlike pine trees that tend to snap, other tree species with denser wood tend to get uprooted entirely.
Though pine trees have softer wood, hardwoods such as water and laurel oaks are more prone to uprooting due to their denser wood and shallow root system. Ultimately, trees that are overmature, have multiple trunks, or have been damaged by disease are the most vulnerable to fall. That's why it's so important to take the necessary precautions now to clean up your yard before it's too late. If trees are not maintained, they can become liabilities.
The most resilient landscape is a landscape that is healthy. So if you are maintaining and caring for your landscape in a way that really cares for the plant health, then those plants are going to be more resilient in the face of potential damage.
There are other things to avoid when preparing your yard ahead of hurricane season.
We want to make sure that people are not hurricane pruning their palms. And we also want to make sure that folks are avoiding the kind of pruning on hardwood trees that's called lion's tailing, where it forces all of the foliar growth out to the end of the branch. Basically, that creates a giant sail for the wind to push against, and it makes the branch more likely to fail.
Florida statute also states that if a landowner's dead tree falls on their neighbor's property, the owner of the tree is liable. However, if the tree is alive, the owner is not. So make sure you are preparing your yard ahead of time to avoid potential unnecessary costs and damages to your property and others.
Coming up next, helping those who may need it the most. How one North Central Florida man continues to pay it forward after last year's hurricane season.
You're watching the TV20 First Alert Hurricane Special, sponsored by Comfort Temp Heating and Air.
Business owners and homeowners in Cedar Key are still rebuilding and resettling, first from a fire and then Hurricane Helene within the same month. We spoke to new Cedar Key Mayor Jeff Webb about changes made to help you get back to the island after a storm.
One of the things we're really working on is making sure that we have the attitude is our goal is to get citizens on as quickly as possible. That's the goal. We have passes that we had last year, but even if they don't have passes, we're putting together a new plan where it may take longer to get on the island, but just because you don't have a pass, we're putting together a process so that they can get on. It's just going to be a little bit more painful.
What started as one man's calling after the last hurricane season has grown into a family effort, now a business, with a mission to help the most vulnerable this hurricane season for free. TV20's Misty Webb shows us how it all began and where it's headed.
Yeah, I'm beyond blessed.
In the chaos that followed a devastating hurricane season, JJ Polk grabbed a chainsaw and a calling.
I just wanted to make a difference in the community, and I felt like in my heart that was the right thing to do. So that's what I've done.
His small act of service lit a fire in the hearts of others, including JJ's brother, Thomas Polk.
I guess I kind of recognized the spark. I seen what he was doing and realized what he was doing is a really great thing. I wanted to help him, support him. I had a little bit more resources to bring to the table to help as well.
Together, the two built Tomahawk Lawn and Handyman LLC, a team that started with emergency storm cleanup and stayed for the long haul.
If something comes through and we have emergency situations, we'll grab our bootstraps, tie them up, and do the same thing all over again with more manpower and more resources this time as well.
From driveways washed out to trees crashing through homes, the work hasn't slowed, but neither has their faith.
Dreams really do come true. Keep working is all I can say to that. God's provided a way for us every step of the way.
We wouldn't be here without him. We would have never came this far without him, I can promise you that.
Even with fewer emergencies, the duo and their other brother stays ready, never turning down a neighbor in need.
There ain't really as many emergency needs right now, so we just been kind of doing our own thing to catch up on the expensive that we did spend. So, but if an emergency comes, or if somebody needs to get in their driveway or something falls on their house or something like that, we can still help out.
From a chainsaw and a calling to a full-blown mission of hope.
It started as a little spark with a boy in a Craftsman chainsaw.
JJ and Thomas say they plan to keep expanding their work to reach more families in need, no matter the storm. And they are already preparing to face this hurricane season head-on with the resources JJ Polk didn't have to begin with. In Dixie County, Misty Webb, TV 20 News.
We've given you a lot of important information, which can be found at our Hurricane Headquarters section of WCJB.com, including a complete hurricane survival guide with evacuation zones and shelters, and what you should include in a hurricane kit. We hope you're now better prepared for this hurricane season.
And remember, it only takes one. It doesn't have to be considered a major storm to do damage.
Talk with your family now and come up with a plan before it's too late.
From the TV20 news and weather teams, thank you for watching this First Alert Hurricane Special.
Sponsored by Comfort Temp Heating and Air.